Hello, everybody. It is Friday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for the Friday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast by Post-Gazette sports columnist Paul Zeise. We did it, Paul. We got through the end of the mini bye, sandwiched on the other side of the actual bye. So we've had basically 3 weeks with about 2 days of football, or it'll be almost a month by the time they kick off this game against the Packers on Sunday. So we're breaking in some of the rain delay material here, Paul. We're going to talk about the trade deadline, their options, considering the way the quarterback draft market has unfolded. Should they be hoarding capital still to draft some of these guys? Should they be looking to use some of it at the NFL trade deadline to make this team better with Aaron Rodgers at the helm? We're also going to talk about Aaron Rodgers' future in Pittsburgh in the second segment. Before we do, we want to thank a couple of sponsors. This show is presented by FanDuel. We also want to thank Edgar, Snyder & Associates. Law firms come and go, but what law firm has been here in Western PA fighting for injury victims for more than 40 years? It's Edgar, Snyder & Associates. What firm has a staff of over 130 people who live and work here? It's Edgar, Snyder & Associates. Law firms come and go, but Edgar Snyder is a name you can always trust. So remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. If you've been hurt in an accident, call them at 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com. They're available 24/7. Paul, let's talk about these draft QBs. Drew Allar, Garrett Nussmeier, Cade Klubnik, Arch Manning, Lenore Sellers. You can keep going down the list of these college quarterbacks who've been underwhelming to some degree or another. Obviously, we're at midseason. Some of these guys might be able to hit their stride. Some guys maybe that weren't on our radar might emerge on our radars at some point. But right now, all of those guys, we talked about the Steelers hoarding picks for. They have a whole bunch of compensatory picks. I think they have 10 or 11 total in this upcoming NFL draft in Pittsburgh. We talked about them hoarding those so they can trade up for a quarterback. I don't see any guys on this list right now, Paul, that I want to see them trade up for, considering they could probably make the team better in other areas. What's your read on what Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin's draft strategy should be at this moment, considering these guys are broadly just not living up to expectations?
Well, I think that's probably the first thing is that, I heard so many people say, well, the Steelers, their plan, it's to wait till next year because next year was when there's this crop of quarterbacks coming and all that other good stuff. But the funny thing is, I tried to tell people you can't just rely on having the right draft pick to go get a quarterback, number one, and number two, you just don't know how these guys are going to, play this year. We thought they would be pretty good, but obviously they've all had sort of flaws. Cade Klubnik is a guy that I never thought was any good. Lenore Sellers looks to me like a guy who probably is, just going to be one of these Justin Fields types that's never really develops into a quarterback. Arch Manning obviously has been a big disappointment. We could go Drew Allar. He's the one guy that I'm still intrigued by, not as a first rounder, but I think that, there's something to be said for maybe he was just in the wrong system or they were asking him to do things he's not really good at. And there's a lot of discussion around that. But to me, the draft strategy now has to be basically, use all of those draft picks to really get better and fill some holes. And they've got plenty of holes to fill. It's not like they don't. To me, when you have that many draft choices, you're basically saying that you are going to be able to rebuild a little bit. So that would be what I would tell them that they should focus on.
We'll talk about what they could do in the trade market in a second. I think one question on these young quarterbacks, though, are you even still drafting one of them? Let's say you have a similar season to the last handful. You go 10-7, something like that. Slip into the playoffs or barely miss them, and you're picking somewhere around 20. Maybe it's 20, 24, maybe it's 18, somewhere in that type of range, but it's late. You're not getting guys, your pick of the lot at the top of the draft. Are any of these guys playing like they're even still worth that to you, or are there other positions you're looking at on this team and saying, I'd like to see them be able to go get a solid prospect here or there. I think cornerback is going to be on a lot of people's lists. You're going to have a guard spot open up if Isaac Seumalo leaves in free agency. The defensive line, I think, still could use some boosts in depth. So how are you looking at that, let's just say, number 22 pick, hypothetically? Is it still quarterback for you at all? Or is there someone else you'd be intrigued about them looking at?
I think it's got to be cornerback or wide receiver or quarterback, I think, is where you have to go with that pick. Now, I would have to see who's on the board, Adam, at 22. And that would be probably a real big part of my decision, because if there's a guy that feels like he might actually be a legitimately good NFL quarterback and he's on the board, you got to take him. But it can't be a Kenny Pickett situation where you panic, you need a quarterback, you panic, and you reach for a guy who's not a first-round draft pick in the first round, and you end up now basically setting your team back a couple of years, I think. To me, it can't be that situation again. It can't be, let's panic, and when we panic, we're going to reach for a guy who is not a first-rounder. We're going to grab him, and just because we need a quarterback, I don't think it can be that. But if there's a guy on the board, and I'd have to figure out who that would be based on who comes out and who plays well down the stretch and who goes, who does well in the combine. I mean, if there's a guy that looks like, okay, he legitimately could be a quarterback that you could build, your team around, yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with him going quarterback. But to me right now, it feels like they're not going to be able to do that they're probably going to have to go corner. They're probably going to have to go receiver. They're probably going to have to go to one of those other positions where they still have a lot of need going forward.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, I don't think you have to do any single one of them, but we had gone into this, everything we've heard about the Steelers from our own guys at the Post-Gazette is that they're just all in on the concept of a quarterback, and I think that's what I just have become suspect of is, I don't have any – personally, there's no one option that I'm saying you have to do that, you have to do that. I just would prefer that they go into it with their options open and say, who is the best player available at a relative position of need and go that direction rather than just saying, like you said, we've got to do what we did with Kenny Pickett with some of these guys, because I don't think they've lived up to those expectations enough to warrant that. And I keep coming back to that Kenny Pickett draft class. He wasn't the only one. Those guys all stink. And sometimes that just happens. Do I think all of these guys are going to stink? I don't know. We still got a half a season to go. Guys will have a chance to prove themselves. But, even the playoff games don't always tell you who's going to be good in the NFL, right? Will Howard won the national championships, and the Steelers got him late on day 3. So, do they want to see him maybe develop a little bit compared to some of these guys, considering what he was able to do on big stages and considering these guys haven't quite lived up to that yet? Paul, let's talk about the wide receiver position specifically as a potential destination for some of these draft picks if they do decide to go that direction and not wait till the draft and say we can go out and get a solid guy, maybe sign him to a deal like we did with DK Metcalf and have him around as DK Metcalf's number 2 for a period of time. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN listed some guys he thinks would be good targets for the Steelers. Chris Olave of the Saints, Jaylen Waddle of the Dolphins, Jakobi Meyers of the Raiders. A, how interested are you in any of those names? And B, what would you be willing to give up to get them?
I think they all would be an upgrade over what the second receiver right now is for the Steelers. So let's start there. I mean, if your goal is to make your team better, you're willing to do some things to make your team better. You might be willing to maybe even slightly, and I wouldn't say very much, but I mean, I think if you look at what the market has been for these receivers when they're traded, if you're the Steelers, you might be able to part ways with a third-round pick if that's going to, be what it takes. Or I wouldn't go crazy for any of those guys, but I would be willing to, part ways with a pick, maybe even like a third and a fifth or something, if to get a guy like Jaylen Waddle. I just think the biggest thing with the Steelers is their second receiver spot. It's not good enough. And to me, they need to go find that guy. I don't know how you find him in the middle of the season, but a trade would obviously go a long way towards doing that. And I think that's where you basically say, okay, this is who they need to go get. And I don't look at the market as being, where they're going to have to like overpay a lot. I don't think that's going to be the case at all.
Well, and you've got the third round pick that you acquired for George Pickens. Could you just hypothetically flip that into one of these guys with less of the headaches? And you're basically back where you started, just without the things that George Pickens brought to your locker room. And like you mentioned, maybe you can throw in a later pick, because if you're already trading the third, is the seventh going to be the thing that helps you move up and get a quarterback? If that's still something you want to do, probably not. Paul, in terms of trades, is there any other position you're considering a deal for? We've talked a lot about cornerback. They've invested a lot there. They spent a lot on Slay in the offseason. Obviously made the big trade for Jalen Ramsey. You have Joey Porter Jr. as a guy you've invested a high draft pick in. Is there room for another corner in this group? Do they have to figure it out for this team to get where it wants to go? Or would you still not mind adding to that group and having the option to hold a Darius Slay late in his career accountable, or maybe use Jalen Ramsey in more of that hybrid role that we talked about immediately after the trade, rather than just pigeonholing him into, number one corner that's going to face the, the best receiver on another team man-to-man all the time?
Well, going back to the receiver thing real quick, I think one of the things that always should be highlighted is just how badly the Steelers have mangled this. If you think about it, they should have just kept George Pickens, to be honest, and I don't know why they didn't. The bottom line is you can let him walk at the end of the season. Like, it's okay. Like this thing where every single player that we have to be able to get something back for. So, before we let him leave, sometimes, you know what, you might lose a guy, but if you're trying to win this year, which allegedly they are, right? If that's the case, then you have to be willing to say, we'll lose George Pickens if he leaves in the offseason, he leaves and, we'll figure it out. They've got enough draft picks, acquired and whatnot. I mean, they could easily draft a receiver next year. So to me, let's start there. Instead of, us in the middle of the season scrambling around to try and trade for a guy, they didn't need to do that if they just basically said, we're going to keep George Pickens around. Now, at corner, it would be a monumental failure, wouldn't it be, if they had to go out and get another corner? Given what they've tried to do to build the secondary, given what they've tried to do to convince us that they've rebuilt the secondary, by the same token, I mean, if they traded for one, and you're obviously probably not going to get an outside guy, but if you can get a good slot corner, because I think Darius Slay is cooked. I just don't think he's really bringing much to the table. I think most of the other guys that you could name that would be in that spot, most of them are all just sort of, ham and eggers. I think that your two outside corners have to play a lot better than they have. But the reality is, if they traded for a corner, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, other than they would basically be admitting that they, either evaluated poorly or just made some really bad decisions in the offseason to build that position.
Last thing I'll say about the receivers, Paul, is I think the math was, kind of see how the season goes, let things unfold, and if these quarterbacks stink, then yes, maybe you can flip the third round pick into another receiver, or if you need that third round pick to trade up for a quarterback, you have it. That seems to have been the logic. I didn't completely disagree with it at the time. It just hasn't unfolded that way, and I think where I'm starting to agree is, like, having seen Aaron Rodgers, I think you can win with him, especially if you equip him with the necessary pass catching options. And so I think they should be willing to consider flipping that third round pick into something. I don't think it was a mistake per se. I think I disagree with you there, but at this point, knowing what I think it would be malpractice not to try to make this team a little bit better. Paul, let's talk a little bit more about Aaron Rodgers' future on the other side of this break, because I think that's an interesting component of this, moving forward. Is he a guy that you can look at past 2025, or do you just want to keep playing, on the carousel and seeing who else you could potentially get this coming off season? So we'll talk about that on the other side of this break. Before we get to that conversation, we would like to thank another couple of sponsors. First is Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci, Pittsburgh's mesothelioma and asbestos attorneys, standing up for victims of mesothelioma and asbestos cancers. They have over 85 years of experience. Visit them online at sdklaw.com. We also want to thank Olivian Numismatic Rarities. Gold prices are through the roof, and there's never been a better time to cash in. At Olivian Numismatic Rarities in Shadyside, you can turn your unwanted gold into instant cash safely, securely, and with full transparency. Bring in your old jewelry, coins, or bullion and get top dollar for Pittsburgh's most trusted gold buyer. Visit onrcoins.com or stop by 5833 Ellsworth Avenue today. We will be right back. Second segment here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Adam Bittner, joined by Paul Zeise. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers' future in Pittsburgh. Paul, building off that previous topic of, what you want to do at quarterback long-term, especially looking at this year's draft class, how comfortable are you with the notion of a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers next year? Has she shown you enough to believe against this portion of the schedule, or are we still in the Russ Wilson honeymoon phase from last season where you're going to have to see him do it against better teams to begin talking about next season with him?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that report about, Aaron Rodgers. I think it was Jeremy Fowler, like you said. And I don't understand why this conversation is even being had right now. I can't understand why they're even thinking about that and going in that direction. You have 11 games left. You've got a 41-year-old guy, and you've got 11 games left. You have no idea what it's going to look like at the end of the season. And you know what? It could be a situation where by the end of the season, everybody knows, yeah, he's done. I mean, he just progressively, gets a little bit worse or whatever because he's old. I mean, and as the season goes on, he gets a little old, beat up. And if you are in a situation where he plays really well down the stretch and looks like he wants to play again, well, guess what? You could sign him easily. You could still sign him. So to me, I just think that it's one of those things where I don't understand why you would even entertain this conversation when you've got bigger fish to fry right now, and all that other good stuff, and he's not going anywhere. If he has a good season, it's not like he's going to go back on the market. And if he's going to play somewhere next year, I would be willing to bet 99% he wants to be here. I mean, he's found a place where he likes the coaching staff. He likes the structure of the way the organization is, all that stuff. You can deal with him at the end of the year. I just think it's silly.
Yeah, although I think he's played well enough that you can say you don't have to go all in on the note. And this is what we were talking about since the first segment. We believed going into the season that they were all in on a quarterback. I think he's played well enough for you not to have to feel that way, and that you can kind of make those decisions at the end. And here's the other thing I'll say, Paul. I don't hate the notion of just generally playing with these veteran quarterbacks. Maybe it's not Aaron Rodgers next year, but we've seen guys who are late career change teams, have success. Sam Darnold's on that list. Baker Mayfield's on that list. Increasingly, I think that might be the path for the Steelers moving forward, is saying, can we get a proven guy who maybe doesn't have the upside that some of these draftable QBs could have, but also doesn't carry the same level of risk that some of those guys do, that you're going to end up in a Kenny Pickett type of situation. I think that's the lesson I'm taking from Russell Wilson last year, from Aaron Rodgers this year, is you can probably find a guy that can win you some games. If you want to be a Super Bowl contender, you might need more than that, but unless you know you're getting that from a draft QB, you don't want to discount these veteran options. Do you
but then aren't you like basically trying to hit an inside straight every single year? I mean, you've got to have
to be every year. If you could get Baker Mayfield on a 4-year deal, Paul, I think that would be like a category I'm talking about as well.
I guess, yeah. But it seems to me like, the Steelers have basically gone, into this situation where they are, basically, just trying to, find 1-year guys or whatever. It doesn't make sense to me. You can't continue to do that every single year and hope that it works out.
No, but I do think you also just don't want to. I don't think you want to go the Kenny Pickett route again. I think this, where you are right now, is better than you were in those 2 years where you were messing around with Kenny Pickett. And if that's
no question. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I don't think there's any question. You cannot reach for a quarterback who's not good enough. There's no question.
Paul, what do you think about Aaron Rodgers' version of leadership compared to Russell Wilson's a year ago, for all the concern people had about the distractions and all that stuff with Aaron Rodgers going into the offseason? Took the guys to a Penguins game this week, but he's also verbally and visibly holding them accountable on the field, kind of a carrot and stick method to leadership rather than the seemingly all carrots toxic positivity that Russell Wilson brought to the table.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is when you look and you compare Russell Wilson to Aaron Rodgers, the other guys in the locker room respect Aaron Rodgers. That's a big start, right? Where you look at Russell Wilson, and he wasn't very popular in the locker room. A lot of the guys in the locker room thought he was disingenuous and, not necessarily really the guy that he claimed to be, a little bit too much rah-rah stuff. I mean, when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers, I mean, people want to follow him because he's got a track record, but also everything that we had written or had heard about him, being a diva and all this other stuff, none of that has come true. None of that has been true. He's said and done all the right things since he's been here, hasn't he? And he's been a guy who's been a leader. I think one of the things about it is, even though it was a long time ago, when you're a Super Bowl, when you've won a Super Bowl and you've won multiple MVPs, guys want to listen to you.
Yeah, I think what I'm noticing is the big difference is there just seems to be a level of relief for Aaron Rodgers being here compared to Russell Wilson a year ago, where I feel like Russell Wilson was kind of putting the pressure on himself to be a franchise guy again. I think Aaron Rodgers has come in with a different mentality of like, yeah, this is probably a short-term thing. Maybe he's going to be here next year. But he knows, I think he said at the Ireland game, he's teeing off on 18 in terms of his career. And it does seem to just have a level of lightness and relief that maybe Russell Wilson didn't have, because maybe Russell Wilson wants to play significantly longer. Whether he can or not, it's a different question. But I think he came here thinking he could play 3, 4, 5 more years. And I think you saw the pressure build on him in a way that it doesn't for Aaron Rodgers, because he knows whether it's this year or next year, this is probably it. Paul, let's get out of here on this. Steelers are 3.5-point favorite, or 3.5-point underdogs, according to our friends at FanDuel this week against the Packers. How do you think Aaron Rodgers is going to handle facing his former team, and not just like the Jets, a small stop in his career, but the team that he is going to be defined for in most people's recollection? It's not going to be the Steelers. It's not going to be the Jets. It's going to be what he did with the Packers is how you're going to remember him. And this might be the only time he plays against them on the other side. How do you think he'll handle everything that's going into that?
Well, I honestly think that if the game was in Green Bay, it might be a little bit different. And that's the biggest thing I tell you. The game, to me, being in Pittsburgh, probably is going to take a lot of that nostalgia out of it, just because, he'll look across and they'll be wearing their, the uniform. They'll see the uniform and all that other stuff. But for the most part, the atmosphere will be a Pittsburgh atmosphere. The fans will be Pittsburgh fans, all that other good stuff. To me, I feel like it's one of those things where once the game starts, I don't know that it's going to be a factor. I really don't. I think there'll be a little bit before, and he'll meet with some people that he knew and all that other good stuff. But the fact that it's here and not there changes everything for me, at least in my mind.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. But Paul, thank you for joining me this week on the North Shore Drive podcast. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. We got a lot more coming your way. I believe Christopher Carter and Brian Bacco will be back with the Saturday edition of the North Shore Drive. And then Paul and I will be staying up late with you on Sunday night to do the Steelers postgame show. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. And please check out our written coverage at post-gazette.com. Always some good stuff there. We'd appreciate you to consider a subscription there as well. Otherwise, we will talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.